Before we get back to working on our user interface, there are two more tools that I want to show you guys that we're not really actually going to use in building our user interface. The first of the two is called Make Grid, and Make Grid comes in handy in two different circumstances. The first being if you have an object and you would like to duplicate that object and have those duplicates be evenly spaced out, either across or down or on an actual grid, both across and down in rows and columns. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to hit the letter R to get my rectangle tool. I'm going to hold Shift and drag out a square. I'm going to make it about 120 by 120 pixels. I'm going to get rid of that border around it and round the corners. And let's just say that this is an app on a home screen. We just have one icon here, so it doesn't really look like an iPhone home screen at this point. But if I go to Arrange and I choose Make Grid, I get some options here for how I want to duplicate this object. Because I only have one object selected, it is going to duplicate it. On the other hand, if you have several objects selected, it'll take the existing objects and arrange them on a grid. So if I already had 24 of these, I could put them into 6 rows and 4 columns. But what I'm going to do here is take my one app icon and I'm going to go into 6 rows and I'm going to go into 4 columns, and then my spacing, I'm going to make it 32 pixels apart for both the rows and the columns, make them all nice and evenly spaced. Now this option down here that says boxed, that's if you're working with shapes that are not all the same size and proportion. If you have some things that are small, some things that are tall, some things that are wide, boxed is going to put an equal size box around all of them, sort of a bounding box if you will, and it's going to space apart those bounding boxes so you don't have a wonky grid. Down here you can see that they have a circle, a small pentagon, and a square, and those are being spaced from the edges of the respective shape. If I check boxed, however, you can see it draws a bounding box of a predetermined size, which you determine, and then the spacing is in between those boxes. I'm going to uncheck that, though, because my shape is a box, and boxing a boxed shape is both redundant and gives me room to make a mistake. So I'm going to leave that unchecked. So now I'm going to get 6 rows, I'm going to get 4 columns, and they're going to be 32 pixels apart. I'll hit Make Grid, and there you go. There you have it. There's my grid, 4 across, 6 down, all evenly spaced and ready to rock and roll. The other way that this comes in handy, I'm going to delete these. I'm going to create an artboard. I'll press the letter A to create an artboard. I'll create a portrait iPhone 6 artboard here. And let's say I'm going to do several screens. Let's say I'm building an app, and that app is going to be made up of, let's say, 24 screens. If I know that ahead of time, then I can go and create all of my artboards ahead of time, and I can do that using the same Make Grid tool. When I have an artboard selected and I choose Make Grid, it works exactly the same way. And let's say we don't want to make a grid. We just made a grid with rows and columns. Let's just say we want 1 column and we want 5 rows. Or better yet, let's say we want 1 row and 5 columns, so that way they go across horizontally, since these are vertical orientation screens. And then for these, I'm probably going to want to go with a larger gap. I'll say a 200 pixel gap in between them. And when I hit Make Grid, there we go. I've got my artboards all laid across, and I'm ready to start designing. It's really handy. It's a way of duplicating things, it's a way of arranging things that already exist, and it works for both artboards and for objects on your canvas.